I've never been one to take things lightly, especially drugs. 1999 was a year of excess. 2000 will be a year to control my consumption. When I wrote to you before, I was only just getting into psychedelics properly. Now I've done my research, done as many entheogens as I thought was safe, know the facts and know what I like. I like P. mexicana. My two favorite types of mushrooms are P. mexicana and P. semilanceata. Why? In my experience they are both more visual than other species I have tried. Thai were good, but not as great as these. My first Mexicana trip blew my head off, almost literally. Now, whenever they are available, I'll travel miles to get my hands on them. It was the last weekend before I had to go back to studying. The 99-2000 holidays had been good for me, really good. I hadn't gone over the top on the drugs, but I had seen enough and felt enough weird stuff to feel I had come out of the few months I had off having learned something. If you're not familiar with the English schooling system, I am in the 6th form, and the most important exams of my school career, A-levels, are coming up. They will decide whether or not I get into a good university, so the winter holidays were the last ones I could really let my hair down in before I left school. I woke up quite late on Friday morning deliberately. I had anticipated that my last crazy weekend would be pretty damn crazy, but I decided to make it even crazier. I didn't eat breakfast or lunch, and after a shower and a cup of tea, got the bag of dried P. mexicana I had bought a couple of days before out of my secret drawer, the one that keeps my mum away from my stashes. It was about 1 p.m. Eagerly, I tipped the shrooms out onto some newspaper and started examining them. I was very pleased. There were plenty of enormous heads, almost outnumbering the stalks, which for me is very unusual. I estimated I had about 3 grams, since I had bought 5 and given what I thought was 2 to a friend. After deciding that this was a trip to be had on my own, I usually learn more from solo trips, and munch down the dried shrooms with a cup of peppermint tea. Peppermint tea when you're tripping is great, I promise you. The effects came on in about 20 minutes after smoking a pretty pathetic joint I had rolled with some getting old African bushweed bought the week before. However, it did catapult me into the shroom trip. It started with white mist swirling around my body. If I closed my eyes a little, leaving space so that I could still see, the mists got clearer and thicker. They had the consistency and smooth patterns of movement of tobacco smoke, just a lot more elegant. This lasted for about an hour, and I walked around my house watching the weird mists move across my body, occasionally touching me, occasionally going off somewhere else to swirl round something else before returning to me. It was one of the most pleasant feelings I have had on shrooms. Unfortunately, apart from the occasional changing wall pattern, or 3D geometric images, that was all the trip really was, and it didn't last all that long. I think the fact I had tripped in daylight contributed to the lack of intense visuals, since I had been warned by many a friend that it was not half as good as tripping at night. I was really disappointed. The last 2 Mexicana trips I had been really freaky, the last being the weirdest trip I have had so far, crazy paranoia that everything I touched or ate was spiked with LSD, really intense facial warping on other people, especially friends who were tripping as hard as I was, powerful psychedelic color visions, feelings of floating across the floor, being totally sure I hadn't moved to have got into a completely different room, etc., but that's another trip. It was about 5 p.m. when the shroom stopped completely, and I went downstairs to have a bite to eat. 3 hours later, I was off on my way. Myself and 4 friends had decided to go clubbing that Friday night. I was certainly up for it after the disappointment with the mushrooms, but did feel a little tired. Before I left the house, I made a little tea with some herbal ecstasy I had bought from a mail-order company in Amsterdam. It's pretty good stuff, but a little too like speed, but with no come down. Feeling ready to go, and went to meet my friends at an underground subway station in North London, England, near where I live. We went to a nice dope house party with some really nice people until around 10 p.m. and then went back to the underground station to catch a train down to South London, which was where the club we were aiming to go to was situated. First, let me explain what clubbing is for me. It is not about going to a cheesy club, buying cocktails and dancing to hip-hop or house. London has an insane underground drug scene, and most of that is made up by crazy heavy shamanic, tribal trance clubs. It is my music, and at the moment I rarely listen to anything else. Behind the false drug security at the doors of these clubs, you can buy anything under the sun, and I really mean that. But, the best thing about this scene is the vibe. It is brilliant. Because there are far more drugs being taken by the shamanic trance crowd than by any other dance culture crowd. Everyone is so happy and so spaced out that there are never any problems, and the police don't seem to bother, or don't notice. Every time you go to one of these clubs you will have made new connections, both with decent dealers who actually do the drugs with you and tell you about what's in what they give you, and with like-minded heads like yourself. However, that particular night my friend X******** had organized to pick up what he claimed were going to be particularly good pills. He has pretty good connections, so I believed him, and we went with him to pick up the goods. I bought 2, he bought many more, but intended only to take 2.5, and the others paid him for 1 or 2 depending on how he felt. They were Ferraris, and had the Ferrari symbol clumsily printed on their fronts. In England, the most common pills at the moment are probably Mitsubishis, which have always been good from my experience, but Ferraris are supposed to be much more rushy and much more powerful. I was really looking forward to dropping them. Then, with pills in pockets, and with the herbal ecstasy I had taken completely out of my system, we headed off to Brixton, one of the main points in South London, to find our club. There were a number of clubs doing trance, hard acid house nights, and after queuing up for one that seemed a little too commercial, we headed for one less obvious, but apparently a lot more trippy and more my sort of thing. When we got there, it was pretty much empty, but it was only 11 p.m., so we went up to the chill-out rooms to relax and drop our first pills. On both the dance floor, bar and chill-out room walls really trippy pictures had been painted with furious psychedelic or fluorescent colors. The lighting set up everywhere, which made heavy use of ultraviolet and other bizarre types of lamp that really made me trip out later on, really made the paintings glow. I knew instantly this place was a bit of an acid den, but I like acid dens, so I decided to relax. My theories were proven correct when I started to talk to the people in the chill-out room. Many of them had come early so that they could take their trips and not be tripping when day broke. The other people sitting around us were either pilling, or doing DMT and other tryptamines. We dropped our Ferraris, bought vast quantities of cigarettes. I know they're bad, but they taste so good when you on E, and water, and waited to come up. An hour later, up we came, and boy did we fly. From the first instant we started to feel the Ferraris working, the rushes came hard, fast and intense. The club filled out to almost packed, and we met more and more pilled up or tripped out people, all of whom were great fun and not at all freakouts. Sometimes you get really effed up people who can really mess up your time and freak you out. We danced and chilled continuously until 3 a.m., and then, having congregated with ourselves and some new acquaintances in a corner of the chill-out room, we dropped the rest of our Ferraris. I was still rushing hard off my first pill, but thinking ahead, I decided it was a good idea to drop my last pill and smoke a joint before going back to the dance floor. When I came up on my second pill, I was back in the chill-out room, and things started to go really weird. I had had visuals on pills before, also after taking shrooms, but not to this extent. It had to be the psilocybin in my body. I didn't freak out because I knew it was a combination of the lights and my mind that were creating what I saw, but originally it was pretty scary. All the faces of those people around me who were on acid, and only the faces of acid trippers started to grow large, move out and away from their original position. Noses were huge and ugly, skin was flabby and folded, and the skin was tinged a horrible green, the color you would expect in a monster movie. Occasionally I caught a glimpse of what they really looked like, but it took so much concentration and effort to do so that I eventually gave up. Turning away from the warping faces, I noticed other visuals, but these were ones that I had seen before, also on pills, and they are the softest, most beautiful visions I have experienced. It is hard to explain, but basically they are webs of green, red and purples that come out from foreheads, walls, basically anything blank and vaguely flat. The best thing about them is the fact that I can catch them with one finger and spin them round it until the web begins to break up and sends tiny different colored particles of light away into the air until there is nothing left. The bigger they are the better they are, and occasionally and can grab hold of one and actually walk around a room with it. Other familiar things appeared to me, like rows of moving letters, some of which I could identify and others which looked like ancient runes written in mediaeval style. With the addition of the constant rushing that I was getting, increased by any furious dancing I did, this was a perfect trip, not too powerful, very ecstasy-orientated and generally really beautiful. I left the club at 6 a.m. still with some visuals remaining, but I was really tired, really happy, and really glad that my holiday had ended on such a great note. Love and respect to the whole worldwide community.